Hello and welcome to EcoElsa. Parents and teachers, have you been trying to get your students or your kids outdoors this winter? Well, coming up, 5 tips to help you get your kids outdoors. Snowball fight! It's snowing! The very first tip that we'll be going over is making sure that your kids are prepared for the weather. I know this is a very obvious one, but that's why we're doing it first, and we're going to cover it as quickly as possible. It's making sure your kids are not overdressed or underdressed for the weather. Honestly, overdressed is usually better than underdressed because you can always take off a layer that you have, but you can't always put on a layer that you don't have. So it's a fine balance between making sure your kids are warm enough but also that it's flexible enough that they can actually move around outside. I mean, we don't want to be like the little kid from A Christmas Story where he can't put his arms down, right? I can't feel my arms! I can't feel my arms! See, this is how in Minnesota we dress up our little kids so that they can stay outside longer in winter. And it actually kind of works, except for the getting overheated part sometimes. I can't bend my arms! I can't bend my arms! Now this comes with a couple of different hacks that will make it easier for dressing your kids for winter. These hacks include a wide variety of things, and even then there's so much more you can do, so maybe look up some more hacks after this video and see what else you can do to make sure that your kids are dressed for the weather, depending on what typical problems you've been coming across as a teacher or a parent. So for starters, we're going to start with the feet, because feet are usually one of the first things that get cold for students. Now, for starters, it's making sure they're wearing 2 pairs of socks. You want the inner sock layer to be something synthetic, so it's keeping the sweat and the moisture off the feet so that they aren't getting too cold too quick. And then the outer layer, you want something like wool that's going to help keep the heat in and help keep your feet dry. Moisture out, heat in. The next thing that happens with feet a lot of times is students will think, oh, if I put a ton of layers of socks on, or if I put my feet warmers in my boots, then my feet are going to stay super warm. And the thing is, they cram all this stuff into their shoes, and so there's so much stuff there that they're actually cutting off the circulation of their blood to their feet, and that blood is what's actually keeping their feet warm. So you need to make sure that their boots are not too tight, they're not wearing too many pairs of socks, and they're not shoving, big hand warmers or feet warmers into their boots that it's not doing anything. It's just cutting off the circulation. This also applies to how the students layer. So wearing multiple layers, as I said before, is good because you can always take off a layer, but you can't always put a layer on that you don't have. So making sure they're wearing the right number of layers so that it's actually flexible enough that they can move around so they're not too constricted. If you're in a little bit of a warmer state where you don't get a lot of snow, usually wearing like a layer of leggings on underneath jeans will be good. It'll keep you warm, but it'll also allow you enough flexibility to move around. But also having an outer layer that's waterproof is really good if you're somewhere where it's damp in winter or it's really snowy out. So snow pants are a great thing to have. That being said, a common thing that I've come across is that if you're wearing jeans underneath snow pants, it's way too constricted, and it's really hard to move around and be flexible enough to even just walk through the snow, which is hard enough already wearing heavy boots and snow pants. So wearing a layer of leggings or sweatpants underneath snow pants will make it a lot easier for your kids to move around. Lastly, making sure your head is properly covered with a warm enough hat will be a good thing to do, as well as warm enough gloves. Right now it's pretty warm out here, so I can get away with these little knit gloves for a couple of hours. Make sure they're still wearing gloves that will be warm enough for the amount of time that they will be spending outdoors and the temperature. This is so warm, so nice. Thanks, Mom. Thank you very much. An additional hack that's more geared towards teachers is a lot of times when you get out to class for outdoors, you have students missing hats, students missing gloves, and you kind of you give away all of your stuff, and we want you as a teacher to stay warm when you're teaching outdoors too. So something to keep in mind is in the future when they're having their last lost and found thing at your school, is see if you can get some of those hats and gloves that the school would otherwise donate to a thrift store so that you can use them as a collection in your class for the students who don't have hats or they're missing their gloves, etc. If you're somewhere really cold up in the northern part of the states where you do get snow and stuff, having spare snow pants is a good thing to have too. So another way that this can help, if you can't get these from the school lost and found, maybe there's a policy on it, see if you send a letter out to your parents, and if at the end of the school year, say it's the last kid in their family, there's no more hand-me-downs, then just see if they'll be willing to donate those snow pants or those hats and gloves to your classroom. So that way you will have those things for the students if they forget them, so that way they don't have to sit out from an outdoor class, which would be really sad. The second step to teaching outdoors is making sure you're keeping your kids moving. Now, winter is not the time to have your students sitting for long periods of time, or your kids for long periods of time just sitting in the snow or the cold. They're going to get colder a lot quicker. So you need to make sure you have a wide variety of activities that get them moving around. This could be like games, activities, exploration, and then throughout those, say you have a really active game, then you sit for a little bit, have a discussion about what it was you were learning, and then to another active game. Don't sit for long periods of time at the beginning and the end. Just get them moving and get them learning through that outdoors. Woo! We got it! So the third tip is practicing good cold safety. As I went over in my video on how to plan an outdoor class, this is another big thing when it comes to being outside in the winter, because it could get too cold quickly for your students, so you have to keep the weather in mind. A good rule of thumb is if it's too cold to be outside for recess, then it's probably too cold to be outside for your students. But additionally, they're only outside for recess for maybe 30 minutes, so if you're going to be outside for longer than 30 minutes, there's some other things you need to keep in mind. You as an adult, you have your own stuff, you're usually dressed maybe a little bit better than your students are for the weather if you're planning on being outside, thicker boots, but you're also a bigger person. That means that you will be able to keep more heat in, you have more blood flowing and circulating, so you stay warm a lot longer than they do. So if your feet are already starting to get cold, or your hands are, there's a good chance that your students are already very cold, especially if they don't have good boots on or they're not super prepared for the winter. So a good hack for this is making sure you're breaking up the amount of time that they spend outdoors in the winter time. So maybe it's having an activity in the morning outside and then splitting it up and having the second half of it outdoors right before they get on the buses. So they have all their stuff packed, they got their snow pants and stuff on, you go outside and do your activity for a half an hour, and then you get them on the buses. Additionally, there's other ways you can break up the time that they spend outdoors in the winter. Say you want to have them outside for an hour or an hour and a half. Within each of those 30 minutes, just go inside for a 5-minute discussion on what they've been learning and talking about and exploring maybe, and then go back outside. So you break up that time outdoors a little bit and allow them a chance to warm up. Depending on the weather and the tempo of the place that you're at, you might not even have to actually go inside to, say, the lobby or into your actual classroom, depending on where the door is. You might just need to get them out of the wind, so taking shelter on the side of the building, out of the wind, in the sunshine, might be enough for give them a chance to warm up a little bit and then get them moving again outdoors and with another activity. Number 4 is loss of dexterity. Something to keep in mind with winter is, since it's pretty cold out, the blood in your hands is going to be circulating pretty slow. So a lot of the fine motions of like using pencils with your fingers are going to be really hard to do. In addition, your kids are going to be wearing gloves. Now, even small gloves like these are going to limit dexterity a little bit. So when you're planning the activities for outdoors, make sure you keep in mind that having a lot of writing might be really hard for your students to do, as well as maybe using some fine tools that are really small for their fingers. So save those type activities for once it starts to get a little bit warmer out for your students. Lastly, do include the snow. If you are lucky enough to live somewhere where there's snow outside, including snow as part of your winter classes will make it more fun for your students, especially if your school has a lot of rules about how students are able to handle the snow, i.e. no snowball fights and making snowman and stuff like that. So do include the snow if you are lucky enough to live somewhere where it is. I have found as a Minnesotan that more people enjoy winter if they have an activity that gets them outside in the wintertime, especially if it's an activity that they can only do in the winter. I really like downhill skiing and ice skating, and those are activities that are a lot easier and I can only do in some cases in the wintertime, and that gets me outside. Getting people outside in the wintertime is great also because even right now you can see I'm in the sunshine, and even this little bit of sunshine is giving me a lot of great vitamin D, which is great for my development and it's great for your students. It also helps with controlling moods. So that's why seasonal depression, part of that is usually getting people outdoors more. or getting more vitamin D into their diet in other ways. Lastly, as part of including the snow in your teaching, or just including being outside in winter as part of your teaching, I have a couple of different activities, just kind of rough activities for you to do with your students. Now, most of them do include snow, so if you are unlucky enough to live somewhere where there is no snow, I think unlucky at least, then there's ways of tweaking these activities so that it works with your students. So the very first activity is like the physics of sleds or snowballs. Now, sleds and snowballs are two things that students really like to get into if there's somewhere where there's snow, and sometimes they can't do them at their school because of different safety rules. So you can find ways of including them so that either they're more safe or as part of the learning to help them get that bug out of their system. So say you're at a school where you don't allow snowball fights. Instead of having a snowball fight, you can do the math and physics of throwing snowballs. You can set up a target on a tree and the students take turns throwing snowballs at it. It can even be something as simple as each student gets to throw 5 or 10 snowballs at the target, and you calculate what their percent accuracy is. How many times out of 10 do they hit the target, and what is their percent accuracy? Kind of like a batting average almost. Snowball fight! When it comes to sleds, if you can't allow students to actually be on the sled, you can have them engineer sled type devices and push them down a hill or pull them across the snow and see which one moves better and talk about the engineering of that. A cool another engineering and combining history type thing is building quinzees and igloos. If you're somewhere where there's a lot of snow, it may be great to do, but depending on your school's rules, you may not be actually able to have students go in them. So you might have to make miniature versions and talk about how they engineered building them. Additionally, if you're somewhere where you're not lucky enough to have snow, you can make a bunch of ice cubes ahead of time and have the students go outside and use those ice cubes and find ways of stacking them together to make igloos, and then talk about how they went about doing this. You also can do a lot of different art type activities outside in the winter time. So this could be things like snow sculptures for the students, or actually using outdoor safe paint to have them paint in the snow and different stuff. Or it could be more of the language type arts. You can have the students go outside and explore for 30 minutes and then come back inside and write a poem about being outdoors in the winter or about snow. A common writing prompt is actually "if I was a snowflake." And a lot of students, this allows for a lot of creativity. You have everything from snowflakes being attached in snowballs to the science of the snowflake and how it's so unique from all the other snowflakes, all the way to Whoville on a snowflake. Kids are pretty creative, and this allows for them to do a little bit of imagination while practicing some of their writing and reading skills. And the very last kind of area that you can do with snow outdoors is kind of the physical sciences. So you can do the science of freezing fresh water versus salt water, which one freezes first, and maybe some other experiments along with that. Or you can do rolling giant snowballs. What's cool about giant snowballs is if you've ever made one before rolling it, eventually you notice it starts to pick up other things besides the snow. It starts to pick up the grass and the leaves and other stuff. And what's cool about this is you can start teaching your students about how glaciers work and using that as one of your teaching tools to help teach your physical science units. It's snowing! So that is all we have time for today, unfortunately. So please comment below if there's an activity you really liked, a tip you really appreciated, or something else you want to share with the community. I'm sure you have plenty of more tips for taking kids outside in the wintertime, and I'd love to hear from you. If you really like this video, please like the button below or hit the subscribe button below. I post new videos on Wednesday, so stay tuned next week for a new video. If you have ideas for videos you'd like to see in the future, please comment below an idea or tweet me at Elsa Latecki. I hope you all have an awesome week. You be safe, learn lots, have fun, and get your kids outdoors. Bye! Now I'm just being goofy. I'm not going to throw this actually at the camera, but I want to make it look like... Wah!